Good afternoon. Welcome to Virginia Times. We have a very special guest today. Please give a warm welcome to President Thomas Jefferson.
Thank you, Miss Matei. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Mr. President.
Please, call me TJ.
Oh, Thomas, I couldn't. I have many questions for you, Thomas, but before we begin, may I offer you some refreshments?
Well, thank you, Miss Matei. Of course.
First, would you tell us about your childhood?
Why, yes. I was born in Virginia on April 13th, 1743. My parents were Peter and Jane Jefferson. My father was a farmer. Our farm was called Shadwell. I grew up with three older sisters. Jane, who was 2 years older than I, was the one I played with the most, so you may say she was my favorite.
I understand you have quite a good education.
I have always loved learning. I went to a school near Shadwell. I learned all the usual subjects. I also learned to play the violin. When I was 16, I went to college at William and Mary College in Williamsburg. I then decided to become a lawyer, so I studied 5 more years.
I have been to Monticello. The home you designed and built, it is beautiful.
Well, thank you. It took me longer than I wanted to finish it. I kept getting interruptions, like the war and all. I married my wife Martha in 1772. At first we lived in the finished part of Monticello. Shadwell burned to the ground, so we worked hard to make more room for my family. Then our daughter Patsy was born. Then we kept building to make room for her.
You have 2 daughters?
Yes, Patsy and little Polly.
Sounds like your life was very busy.
Very. I served in the House of Burgess in Virginia. I was a delegate to the Continental Congress, wrote the Declaration of Independence in 18 days. I was the governor of Virginia in 1779. I was an ambassador to France, then came back to America to become America's 3rd president in 1800.
You have an impressive resume. Tell us about some of the changes you made while governor in the state of Virginia.
Well, some of the old laws were just plain cruel, so I worked hard to get rid of them.
Can you give us an example of some of those cruel laws?
Well, of course. One of them was burning women who were accused of being witches. Another was that you could be hanged for stealing. I couldn't stop slavery from being in Virginia, but I could stop slave ships from arriving in Virginia.
Is there anything else you did to help the people at the time?
Well, Miss Matei, you know how important education is to me, so I set up free schools so all children could go to school. I then founded the University of Virginia.
How wonderful. What about when you were president? What are you most proud of?
I felt it was important to expand America, so I sent Lewis and Clark to explore the unsettled West. I also sent John Monroe to France to bargain with Napoleon about buying New Orleans. New Orleans was a very important seaport. Napoleon only agreed to sell us New Orleans if we bought all of Louisiana. That doubled the size of America. It cost $15 million to buy it, though.
Thomas, it has been such a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. I have just one more question. Mr. President, of all the things you have done, what do you want to be remembered for?
There are 3 things I wish to be most remembered for. Writing the Declaration of Independence, writing the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, and founding the University of Virginia.
Oh my. Thank you again for visiting us, President Jefferson.
Thank you, Miss Matei. I've enjoyed being here. And remember, you can call me TJ. Before I go, Miss Matei, I've brought a little something for you. It's a $2 bill. Now, one of my favorite pictures is on this. On the front, there's a picture of me. And then if you turn to the back, it's a picture of the other founding fathers and I turning in the Declaration of Independence to be brought to King George III. So, why don't you go ahead and keep this for yourself?
Thank you.
Why don't we finish our refreshments?
Yes.
Jefferson was a polymath, a man of the Enlightenment, who's interested in all kinds of knowledge, was at heart a scientist. That surprises people, but we'll talk about that as we go through the House. Jefferson was our first Secretary of State, our second Vice President, our third president. He was our minister to France for 5 years after the Revolution, as governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. None of that appears on Jefferson's tombstone. He writes his own epitaph, puts three things: author of the Declaration for Independence, author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, father of the University of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson wants you to remember him for his contributions to three ideas: political liberty, Declaration of Independence; religious freedom, Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom; public education, University of Virginia. Now, Jefferson begins his house when he's only 26 years old on land he inherits from his father. He grew up in Shadwell, which is, you can still make out a little bit through the trees there, about a couple miles away in the flatlands. Calls it Monticello. It means little mountain in Old Italian. He's an architect, a self-taught one, and he calls this his essay in architecture. But if it's an essay, it took him 20 years to write it. Understand that the house that you're about ready to see is the final version of Monticello, but for much of Jefferson's time up here on the mountaintop, this was a construction zone. He's constantly changing the house, constantly renovating, constantly bringing new things, new technology to this house. Now, among the things that Jefferson followed as a scientist was the weather. For at least twice a day and for more than 40 years, he'd write down information about the weather. He's also someone who's fascinated by any kind of mechanical device, things that he called contrivances, things that would help with daily living. Now, it combines both of those right here in the first of several contrivances we're going to see inside the house. Notice the compass dial on the ceiling of the portico. Well, that arrow that you see in that compass dial is connected to the giant weather vane on top. So Jefferson see which way the wind was blowing without ever having to go outside. Now, Jefferson is one of these people who's just fanatical about use of his time. We'll talk more about his clocks inside. Take a glance at the one right there above the door.
4th of July is celebrated with much fanfare across the United States. Here are 5 uncommon facts about the Independence Day. Number 5. 2 of the signers, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, passed away on the same day, July 4, 1826, which was the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Number 4. For the first several decades after the Declaration of Independence was finalized, the famous day was not widely celebrated. Number 3. At the time the document was signed, the population of the United States was 2.5 million, less than 10% of the current population. Number 2. The final draft of the Declaration of Independence was actually written on July 2, 1776, but Congress made revisions, edits, and gave an approval 2 days later, making July 4th the big day. Number 1. The oldest signer of the 1776 Declaration of Independence was Benjamin Franklin at the age of 70.